With Chris Pratt's The Tomorrow War set to debut on Amazon Prime, it got me thinking a whole bunch of stuff. First of all, how much I love the premise. People from the past getting drafted to fight an alien threat 30 years in the future? Sounds pretty cool and unique, which, frankly, draws me to science fiction, and science fiction films especially. However, a good premise can only take a film so far. While I have no clue where The Tomorrow War will ultimately stack up amongst the pantheon of science fiction films, I did see it as a fun opportunity to reflect upon some of the greatest films of the genre. So come along as I look at the best science fiction films throughout the decades. Well, the best according to me. Our journey through the decades begins in the 1920s, and where else but 1927's Metropolis, directed by the immensely talented Fritz Lang. This is arguably the granddaddy of the sci-fi film genre. It brought many elements that are commonplace today. Dystopian future? Check. Social commentary? Check. Extra long runtime and multiple edits of the film that have been re-released throughout the years? Okay, well, that doesn't always happen. But it's this type of ambitious filmmaking and storytelling that may not have immediately impacted the genre, but definitely influenced the auteurs to come later on. And, I mean, have you seen the robot in this film? Kinda looks familiar, right? Right? Admittedly, I haven't seen a lot of films from the 1930s or 40s, especially from the sci-fi genre. While I am sure I could be missing or overlooking some hidden gems, I'm still confident in my picks. There's actually a razor-thin margin separating what I would consider the two best films from the decade. The first being 1933's The Invisible Man, directed by James Whale. The special effects are astounding for the time, and the story is dark and twisted. But there's a film that does the same things with similar themes, just slightly better, and by the same director, funny enough. I'm talking about, of course, James Whale's 1931 monster movie classic, Frankenstein.
It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God! Oh.
The film does so much, not only qualifying as a sci-fi film, but also a bona fide horror film. While I'm sure many today wouldn't be scared by that film, it does have some chilling elements that even I winced at. This is science gone mad, a monster of man's own creation wreaking havoc, and, intentionally or not, killing anyone in its path. This is a golden example of science fiction done right, telling a cautionary tale that when man plays God, their hubris always gets them in the end. The 1940s was admittedly the hardest decade for me to make a final choice. I struggled finding the right pick, but despite the interesting premise of Invisible Agent, one of the many sequels to 1933's The Invisible Man, nothing quite nailed the landing. That is, until coming across the 1940 sci-fi gangster movie mashup, Black Friday.
The only possible way to save George Kingsley's life is by a brain transplantation, an operation I performed successfully on animals. This is a dangerous and illegal operation, but a chance to make a great scientific discovery and perhaps save my friend's life.
never thought I'd say the words sci-fi gangster movie in a sentence, but I've done it twice already. Black Friday follows a doctor transplanting part of a notorious gangster's brain to save the life of his friend. The results, as one should expect, go awry as an innocent professor of English turns into a gangster on a revenge tour. This film is a delightful gem, packed with big names from the era like Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, and we get a great performance out of Stanley Ridge's portrayal of the dueling personas. This film has genuine suspense, and it's definitely a film I think many people would enjoy. For the 50s, there are immediately two films that stand out to me. We were in the post-world of the atomic bomb being dropped, which fed into the creation of 1954's Godzilla, or Gojira as it was known in Japan. While it saddens me that Godzilla isn't my choice here, I hope people give it a watch at some point. Its commentary on nuclear testing and the ramifications personified by a giant lizard are extremely well done for the times. But my pick has to go to a film that melded both the concepts of extraterrestrials and fears and ramifications of nuclear war in 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Let's just say that we're neighbors.
It's rather difficult for us to think of another planet as a neighbor.
I'm afraid in the present situation, you'll have to learn to think that way.
The present situation?
I mean the reason for my coming here.
We're very curious about that, too. Would you care to talk about it?
I'd be glad to. Not now, of course, with you alone.
Or perhaps you'd rather discuss it personally with the president.
This is not a personal matter, Mr. Harley. It concerns all the people on your planet.
There is plenty of iconography and a cautionary message to this film that make it the classic that it is. The first thing most think about when they reference this film is the robot, Gort, and who wouldn't? He is pretty cool, and now that I think about it, robots seem to be a reoccurring theme here. But I digress. The real star of this picture has to lie in the examination of mankind from an alien perspective. Michael Reeney's Klaatu observes and falls victim to the nature of man. By the end of this film, we're left seeing both the good and bad in humanity, and questioning if we could ever overcome our earthly differences in the pursuit of something more. Once again, I was torn between two films for the 1960s. Franklin J. Schaffner's 1968 film, Planet of the Apes, sounds like a hokey B-movie of previous decades, but using the premise of space travelers landing on a planet of apes, we're also able to blend the science fiction with allegories of racial injustice and the civil rights movement. Not to mention, one of the best twist endings you'll find this side of Jupiter.
Damn you! God damn you all to hell!
Which I won't spoil for you if you don't already know. And this leads me to my actual pick for the 1960s, which is Stanley Kubrick's 1968 epic, 2001, A Space Odyssey. The film doesn't hold your hand when it comes to the scope, scale, and journey Kubrick wants to take you on. For the first 10 minutes, you're sitting there wondering where the fuck space comes into play and what the fuck is even happening. Then you get thrust into the main portion of the movie that takes its time. A lot of time to get to where it wants to take you. We get one of the most famous sci-fi artificial intelligences in HAL 9000, which looks like the doorbell cam from Hell. And talks like it too.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
The exploration and the purpose of the AI and his motives are chilling and thought-provoking. Most people may consider this film a long, boring movie that goes off the rails and makes no sense by its ending, but in fact, it's quite the opposite. The film gives you time to think, contemplate what's happening, and what it means. It's no easy task to ask an audience to look at your film and come out the other side with their own interpretations and leave feeling like you've experienced something special at all. The lack of telling an audience how they should think or feel by the time the credits roll is a gamble, and one that pays off for one of the most important films, not only for the sci-fi genre, but of all time. The 1970s is where science fiction began finding its footing. We got 4 sequels in the Planet of the Apes franchise, including a fantastic outing in its 3rd film, Escape from the Planet of the Apes. We also got Stanley Kubrick's follow-up to 2001 with the dystopian crime film, A Clockwork Orange. We felt the sheer terror in outer space with Ridley Scott's Alien, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention the magic of a comic book brought to life in Superman, the movie. But if you haven't figured it out yet, the definitive sci-fi film of the 1970s has to be Rollerball. Just kidding, you know it's the 1977 film Star Wars, aka Episode 4, A New Hope.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
You mean it controls your actions?
Partially, but it also obeys your commands.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
How could the choice have been anything else? This blockbuster became the foundation for science fiction as we know it today. Without the films that we mentioned before, we wouldn't have gotten this important film. Remember that robot from Metropolis? You're telling me George Lucas wasn't inspired by that design for C-3PO? Of course he was. This film's spectacle, special effects, music, and heart gave us so much iconography. You could close your eyes and identify the sound of a lightsaber, the chilling breath of Darth Vader, or the cry of a Wookiee. The basic template of the hero's journey transformed into a space opera that's lasted over 40 years. It captured the imagination of generations to follow, and if you haven't seen it yet, what sandy planet are you living on? Arrakis? Dune jokes aside, the 80s was chock full of so much sci-fi goodness that it was tough to narrow down my pick for this decade. The floodgates were truly open after the release of the original Star Wars. Then, we got one of the most redeeming sequels in 1982's Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. That same year, we got the original Tron, Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Then eventually, its multiple re-released versions. In 1984, we got James Cameron's The Terminator, and another of his films, Aliens, in 1986. Robert Zemeckis brought us the delightful Back to the Future Parts 1 and 2 in 1985 and 1989, respectively. And the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Predator was given to us in 1987. It really came down to, surprise, surprise, 2 films again. And believe me, these decisions aren't easy. I hate to have to leave off what I believe is the best Star Wars movie in The Empire Strikes Back. It hurt me so much to leave this out in the cold in favor of my pick, which coincidentally takes place in the cold, and that's John Carpenter's The Thing. I already listed off a few films from 1982. Now, throw The Thing in there, and that may as well be the finest year in science fiction. From the opening notes of this film's score, we are pulled into the cold wasteland of a journey of paranoia and mystery surrounding the shape-shifting alien organism hiding in plain sight. The mixture of great characters, action, gore, and legitimate scares mix so well together that you can't take your eyes off the screen for a second. You'll marvel at the practical effects work in this film, as well as what has to be one of the greatest man versus machine battles of all time.
Your move, bishop to knight 4. My move, knight to rook 3.
Poor baby, you're starting to lose it, aren't you?
Your move, king to rook 1. My move, rook to knight 6. Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch.
The horror genre can be hit and miss for a lot of people, and believe me, I was that way till I watched this film. It was a good mixture of sci-fi and horror that I would recommend this film to even the most timid fan of horror. Oh, and watch it just to see Kurt Russell's hat. It's so cool. The 90s seemed to reach the peak of the natural blend of science fiction and action, giving us great films like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Total Recall, as well as Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It also gave us a taste for the cerebral with The Matrix, the fun of Men in Black, the underrated charm of The Iron Giant, and by the end of the decade, we also got to see the return of Star Wars in The Phantom Menace. But just because pod racing is cool, doesn't mean the whole movie is. That's right, I went there. But I'm going with Steven Spielberg's 1993 dino romp, Jurassic Park.
Alan, this species of Variformin's been extinct since the Cretaceous period. I mean, this thing isn't this thing. What?
Who didn't love playing with dinosaurs as a kid? They've always seemed to capture our imagination, and in this film, it becomes both a scientific triumph and nightmare. After seeing this film for the first time, we all collectively feared being chased down by a T-Rex, or worse, getting hunted down by velociraptors. We get another classic John Williams score, and another step forward in special and practical effects. It genuinely blends together what you expect from Spielberg: a dash of fun, a splash of wonder, and moments of true terror. From front to back, this film is one for the ages. At the turn of a new millennium, science fiction really ramped up in quality from across the spectrum. It's been especially hard to narrow down a pick in this decade thanks to films like Neil Blomkamp's District 9 or Duncan Jones's Moon. We got the big-budgeted reboot / continuation of the Star Trek franchise. There was a slew of other great flicks that we simply don't have time to mention. So let's just get into my pick for the 2000s with the 2006 film Children of Men.
Diego Ricardo, the youngest person on the planet, was 18 years, 4 months, 20 days, 16 hours, and 8 minutes old.
Between the chilling premise and top-notch filmmaking, this film churns out a terrifying future that shows humanity on the cusp of extinction. With no children being born for 18 years, you would think such a problem would unite the world, but instead it has gone in the complete opposite direction. But what is sci-fi without a little bit of hope in the bleakest of worlds? because we are thrust on a journey that could well give humanity that hope it desperately needs. All the while, we, as the audience, squirm and watch in awe at Alfonso Cuarón's mastery of filmmaking and ambitiously long single takes, which will have you feeling like you're right there in that world, and wondering just how his team pulled off those shots in the first place. The 2010s offered another smattering of fantastic science fiction from across the spectrum. Need proof? Just look at the films of 2011, like The Adjustment Bureau, the not talked about enough Another Earth, or the Jake Gyllenhaal-led Source Code. Even the rebooted Rise of the Planet of the Apes spawned 2 sequels that made one hell of a trilogy. In the years to follow, we got films like Gravity and Her, Edge of Tomorrow, Ex Machina, and Mad Max Fury Road. It's unfortunate that I had to leave off the beauty and filmmaking of Blade Runner 2049, but the decade started off with a winner, and it was hard for anything to top 2010's Inception.
We're asleep, our mind can do almost anything.
Such as?
Well, imagine you're designing a building, right? You consciously create each aspect, but sometimes it feels like it's almost creating itself, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, like I'm discovering it.
Genuine inspiration, right? Now, in a dream, our mind continuously does this. We create and perceive our world simultaneously, and our mind does this so well that we don't even know what's happening. That allows us to get right in the middle of that process.
How?
By taking over the creating part. Now, this is where I need you. You create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
Call me a Christopher Nolan slappy, but Inception caught the world by storm. Everyone talked about it. Shoot, people still argue about it to this day. With dreams within dreams, there are layers within layers, all leading to the debate we all had with our friends. Did the top fall over, or keep spinning? The film had a stellar cast, incredible ideas, and impeccable filmmaking. Its ambitiousness and captivating set pieces allow us to forgive expedition dumps and maybe some iffy logic, because the film sets up its world, its rules, and remains pretty faithful to them from start to finish that you just sit back and enjoy the ride. It might be the best example of big budget spectacle with intellectual ideas. We've barely been in this new decade for a year and a half, so it's hard to crown a best film of the decade when we have so much time ahead of us. The easy frontrunner right now is Christopher Nolan's Tenet, but with Denis Villeneuve's Dune remake right around the corner, that could very well change. Shoot, we have no clue if The Tomorrow War could be that film. It's truly exciting to be a fan of this genre, because there's always some new great film on the horizon.